Okay, so I think since it's been so long since the last year, I probably should start from the beginning of mitzvah lamed hey. A mitzvah achamesh u'shloshim 35. He should see vonu sheyiyeh lanu. In this year, I pointed out this is a verb in the Arabic. It's not a to be in the state of sheyiyeh lanu shem and amishka. We should have it. It should exist. Do you know shemen osui hala miskinis hamiyuchedes in a certain peculiar way, because not all it's shemen hamishcha, not stam shemen, and or hatoar hamiyuchad, vatio hamiyuchad, whatever it is, it's something special. It's not stam shemen hamishcha. Okay. Now, muchan limshoyach boy. So the this question is the Rambam just describing what the shemen is used for, or why we need it, or this is really part of the mitzvah? Muchan limshoyach boy. No, certainly muchan that should be ready to be used. But the question is the Mashiach part of the mitzvah, or it's just that we should have it and it should be available, and that's the mitzvah. But and it should be mukhan for what's usually done with it. But the doing the Mashiach might not be part of the mitzvah. Mukhan limshoyach boy kol kohen gadol shisman. Every kohen gadol, even the son of a kohen gadol, requires Mashiach. Every kohen gadol requires Mashiach. We'll see that it's not likuva on the shem kohen gadol, but every kohen gadol in the mitzvah is to do that. It should have Mashiach. Muchan l'mshoyach boy kol kohen gadol. And call is part of the original Judeo-Arabic. Call kohen gadol, very clear. Call kohen gadol. Sheismane. So it means after minui, there should be a Mashiach. Kmo she'omar hakohen hagadol me'echov asher yutzak al roshei shemen hamishcha. So since the Torah describes the Kohen Gadol in Vayikra Chaf Aleph Yud as a person who had Yitzika al Roshei b'Shemen HaMishcha, so it means that you should do Mashiach on the Kohen Gadol. Whether it's part of the mitzvah or not, we have to. But the Ram is trying to prove, how do we know that a Kohen Gadol requires Mashiach? So l'chayr, that's the pasuk. That's what he's calling you for. V'chein yimshulchu boy. Just let's get the words, and then we'll go into each one by itself. V'chein yimshulchu boy k'tzatz hamalachim. So it means, as opposed to Kohen Gadol, where every Kohen Gadol requires Mashiach, and there's no Yerusha on the Mashiach, or no Yerusha on the Melucha, whatever of Kohen Gadol, or whatever it is. However, in Melech, it's not so. It's only ksas hamalachim, and we'll see what that means. But that's the contrast. And here also, he just says Kamoshi's boy, but we don't know where it says that a melech requires Mashiach. In Kohen Gadol, it's very clear. V'Kohen HaGadol me'ochiv asher yimshach, asher yutzak al roshai. Shem, right? Shem HaMishcha, that's very clear. In Melech, we don't know. We'll see. Bli neder. Kamo she's boyer bedin mitzvazo, and this will be explained. I guess we'll see. Is that Malachim also requires a Mashiach or Mixas Malachim. Ukfa nimshach boy hamishkon v'chol kelov. And then the Ram all of a sudden is telling you a story that this Shemen HaMishcha was not only used l'deires for the Kohen Gadol and Melech, but at the time of the Mishkan proper was Nimshach v'chol kelov. A Mashiach on the Mishka proper also. And that's the Brisa and the Psukim and the Torah. V'lo yimshechu boi hakelim l'deres. So it's interesting. It says Hamishkan v'chol kelov, and then when he talks about deres, he says, "Well, yimshchu boy hakelim l'deres." But it doesn't talk about the Mishkan or that which is in the place of the Mishkan, the Mikdash. There's no Mashiach on the Mikdash. In other words, and truth is, the whole idea of Avodas Mekachase, whatever that is, that L'chor doesn't apply to the Mikdash proper. So I remember, this is an aside, I didn't even expect to talk about this. I remember when we learned Krisus. Wow. Yeah. The Rav, it's about 50 years ago, maybe even 51. Just have to, the Rav asked the question, what is, why did the Mishkan itself require Mashiach? So, the Rav said like this, an interesting thing. He said that it's Cholok Be'etzmi Seidinoi, Mikdash is a Kedushas Mokim, and the Kiddush of the Mikdash is be Shorim and Ochais, in Machne Yisrael, in Teda, okay, in the whole Seder with Teda, Shtei Teda is whatever. In Mishkan, there was no Kedushas Mokim. Wherever the Mishkan was, that's where it was. There was no Kedushas Mokim. So the mechitzas were not necessarily to have a kedusha on them because the mokum itself was kaddish. But here, when the mokum wasn't kaddish, it was the kedusha of the mechitza itself which made the mishkan. That's what he wanted to suggest, and that's why there's no din l'deres. And then the Ram's lashon is very good. He says, "Ukva nimshach boy hamishkan v'chol kelov, v'lo yimshach boy hakel l'deres." Even though logically, you could have imagined there should have been a Mashiach l'deres. Okay, no, there's a custom of that. This is Mashiach, the Mashiach, Moshe Mashiach, and the rest of it is Avodas Makachas. Okay, but Mishkan, there's no need to discuss because since in Mikdash it's a Kedushas Mokim, there's no necessity b'chal for Mashiach. Okay, good. That's not what I meant to talk about, but I thought that I thought you might find it interesting. That's what he just said, like off the cuff. Like the shit, why is it so? And that's what it is. He Rebeo, I know, it's just, I remember just like, it's just like, yes, I remember just, I remember, I also remember this Rakshas that, you see? Okay. Ubloinim shlobo akelim l'doris. Ki bebeya omru b'sifri, the Matiki Ashmur said, שבמשיחוסטן של אלו, רויצלוימה, כלי המשכון, הוקדשו כל הכלים לוסלובוי. And therefore, this is lishot. Okay. Omo Yisala, then very strange. Like there's a whole parenthetical discussion. Like the Ika, see, the truth is, we understand why the discussion is here, because in Torah, Biksav, per se, the Ika Mashiach was said in the Mishkan V'Kalov. And Aaron Ubonov was also part of Chinuch. And we don't quote the psukim of the Mashiach of Aaron in Tetzaveh. We don't quote it because that was for Chinuch. But we have another raya, the Kohen Gadol, HaKohen HaGadol Me'echva, Sheyutzak Al Reishay. But the Ika Mashiach in Torah was Mishkan V'Kalov. So the Rambam has to talk about it, and somehow, what's talking about the Torah, the mitzvah deres, l'chai has nothing to do with what we used the Shemen HaMishcha for originally, and that's what he's trying to tell us. And this is all a parenthetical discussion, parenthetical remark. Then he comes and he tells you the side. Oma Yis'ale Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yehyeh Zeh L'Dereseichem. That it should exist. And that's what he says. He should zivonu sheyeh lonu shemen hamishcha. And that's the pasuk. Shemen mishchas kodesh yeh zeh li l'dorisechem. Ukvar nisboyer isbaru mishpatei mitzvah zo berishon mikrisus. Correct? That's where it is. Hey, Bob. Okay. Okay. So that's what we have over here. There's the existence that Shemen HaMishcha should be extant is the mitzvah. And then he has a discussion about what you do with it and what you did with it in Torah Shebiksav at the time of the Mishkan. And whether that's part of the mitzvah, we have to know. Okay. And then that's the pasuk is Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yehyeh Zeh Li L'Dorisechem. That's what we have. So let's now take it one at a time. Besides everything, if you look at the Rambam, or it's the Gemara, there's a difference between the Mashiachas Melech and the Mashiachas Kohen Gadol. Mashiachas Kohen Gadol is Yitzika, and the Melech is not a Yitzika. The Yitzika, we know from the pasuk, Yutzak al Roshei Shemen HaMishcha. Okay, say it. Now, next. Ksas Malachim. Ksas Malachim is, and we pointed out that She'ein Moishchin Melech ben Melech. And the only time that the Mashiach of Melech ben Melech is Mipnei Machlokes. And this is Gemon Krisus Haley Beis. Ein Moishchin Melech ben Melech. And the Ram Hilchos Klei Mikdash in Perek Aleph Halach Yud Aleph. Vein Moishchin Melech ben Melech Shamalchus Yerusha leMelech Lo'olam. Shenema Hu Ubona Bekev Yisrael. This is interesting. The Ram seems to say the reason why there's no Mashiach because the Yerusha, the Etzem Malchus, was given by Yerusha. Shamalchus Yerusha leMelech Lo'olam Shenema Hu Ubona Bekev Yisrael. But even though there's some type of Yerusha on Kohen Gadol that his son would have, but it's not that it's the Etzem Chefsa of Kuhna Gedola has to be dafka from this mishpacha. Hu'ubana b'kerev Kol Yisrael. So since it's a Hu'ubana b'kerev Kol Yisrael, you don't need Mashiach. V'imois shomachlekes moishchana yisrael the salik hamachlekes uloidia lakol to do salik machlekes uloidia lakol two things salik machlekes uloidia lakol shezeu melech levadoi only him kmo shemoshku shloimoi b'bnei machlekes Adoniyahu v'yoash mibnei Asalia v'yochaz mibnei Yoakim Ochiv. But the mitzvah is to Mashiach call Kohen Gadol. But a melech, okay. Now, this is just. So I'm not sure exactly. There's a very strange phrase. It's nothing to do, just in terms of interpreting words. What does it mean, Kamoshe Hisboya, Bedin Mitzvazo? He explains this here. Someplace. In this mitzvah. Just what does it mean? You get the question?
Yes.
In Kapach, it's called Sheyizboyer. So that means that he had in mind at this point. No, it's certainly true he had in mind this point, because in the Hakdama to Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam says that he's going to write a Mishnah Torah. And he talks about Hilchos Tefillin, Hilchos this, Hilchos that. It's very clear that in mind to write Mishnah Torah. So here, at this point, he's referring to what he plans to write. Kmo sheyizboya, bedin mitzvah. You see, kmo sheyizboya, we understand possibly what it may mean. Okay? But kmo sheyizboya, bedin mitzvah, he's referring to the Gemara. I'm not sure what happened here, okay? Now, continue, okay? But just plain Ivra. Now, let's now start slowly, okay? We talked about here the mitzvah is Yihye, right? But l'chera, there is a tzivui about Mashiach also in the Torah. In Perek Lamed, in Shmos, from Pasuk Chavav to Pasuk Lamed, there's a mitzvah l'shah l'kadosh hamishkan v'kelev Aaron u'bonav v'kahuna. The Mishkan Caleb for the Mishkan and its Caleb, and Aaron u'bonav for kahuna. In that parsha, if you look at it, it's very interesting. All the tzivuyim of the Meshichas, the Mishkan, the Kalov, Aaron Ubonov are said to Moshe. Not to Bnei Yisrael proper, but to Moshe Rabbeinu. However, let's listen. Vaydabe Hashem Moshe Leimo, v'ata kach l'cho b'somim roish, mo dro, chomesh v'chulich, v'yosisa oisoi, shemen mishchas kodesh, loikach milkachas ma'aser lokeach, shemen mishchas kodesh yeh. And that's in Shmos, Perek Lamed from Chof Beis to Chof Hey. And in the Asiyah, Vayikach Moshe es shemen ha-mishcha, vayimshech es ha-mishkan v'es kol kelov, v'es kol asher bo, vayikadosh oisam. Okay. You might want to look, I'm not saying one way or the other, at the HaMitzvos in Shmos Lamed Pasuk Chof Gimel. However, at the end of the parasha, in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, in Perek Lamed, there's a tzivui, another tzivui, about Shemen HaMishcha. V'el Bnei Yisrael Tidaber. Here we're talking to Klal Yisrael, not to Moshe Rabbeinu. V'el Bnei Yisrael Tidaber Leimo, Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezeli L'doiroi Seichem. So it means in Moshe Rabbeinu, the tzivui was a shah. But to Bnei Yisrael, the tzivui l'doros, and orthodox is the mitzvah. So it's mamish beautiful here that the Ram quotes this pasuk, because that pasuk was formulated to Bnei Yisrael. For Bnei Yisrael to daber leimo, Shem is l'doros seichem, and Moshe was a halashah. Halashah is not mean a mitzvahs. Exactly where you would expect it. It's beautiful. Okay, next. Okay. I'm not, maybe we have to go back to this. You should look probably at the mitzvah of Keteres, of Asiyas Keteres, who's making it, what's going on, these are how the Lashon should be looked over there, but that's not for us now, okay? Now, the interesting thing is over here that the Rambam, in many different places, or in different places, he has different opinions about what the mitzvah is. Let's start over here. He says the mitzvah is to have it. And that should exist. And it's learned from the pasuk. Yeh ze lila doisechem. As the Ram quotes. And the mitzvah is that the shemen should exist. But the Ram then says, "Umuchan limshoyach boy kol kohen gadol sheismane." And he quotes the shemen to Yitzchak, and he says, "Yim chusas malachim shemosh boy the mitzvah." But maybe he's just explaining to us, as I said before, what the shemen should be used for, the dairies. Muchan limshoyach. And the Mashiach was not the mitzvah. There are Achronim that learn the opposite and learn that the mitzvah here also, or we'll see exactly, is the mitzvah Mashiach. I don't know if the text supports it, but that's what some Achronim do. Next. The reason why they might want to do this is the Rambam in Shirish Asiri, which is part of the same Sefer over here. The Rambam clearly says there that the mitzvah is the Mashiach.
Only the Mashiach, because before that's the only.
I said the mitzvah is the Mashiach. Okay, we'll see about others. Okay, the mitzvah is the Mashiach. And that's what he writes. But he's talking about that not in terms of the existence of the shemen, but as opposed to the making of the shemen. He's not, the idea that the shemen should exist is not at all even referred to tangentially in Shirish Asiri. So that's why you can't say as opposed to, because it's he's not even dealing with it. So it's not an issue. He writes like this: Lo yimone, v'omnom yimone atzivui shetzivonu shenimshach hakohanim gedolim u'melachim. Again, hatzivui shetzivonu shenimshach kohanim gedolim u'melachim u'klei hakodesh v'shemen המשחה matur. It's very clear. The mitzvah is the Mashiach. Asiyas shemen המשחה is only akadom. It's not part of the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is Mashiach. Odd is that he mentions the Klei HaKodesh over there. And l'chayra, without telling you that it's not l'deres, and and the whole Shloshim, Shirish Shlishi is only about the mitzvah Shah, not the minyan mitzvahs. It's very odd. Now, in minyan mitzvah kotzer, in minyan mitzvah kotzer, it's the same as in the Shloshim. Mashiach, that's the mitzvah. Dos and dos. Minyan kotzer, Aseh lamed hey, limshoyach Kohanim, Gedolim, ומלכים, בשמן המשחה. שנאמר, שמן משחס קודש יהיה זה. How do you say that the mitzvah is the Mashiach? V'yiyeh zeh. Shem and Mrs. Kodesh yezeh. Very, very odd. So yiyeh means yiyeh zeh, that she used the shemen to be mekadesh other things, a very odd interpretation of the pasuk. But if you do that, then you understand why the Rambam doesn't have a mitzvah of the shemen should exist, because you're learning from that pasuk itself, the Mashiach. But it's a very odd way of learning it. But that's whatever. Next, in Mishnah Torah, there's another pshat. So Bekitza is you have a priori sefer mitzvahs, that the mitzvah is yihiyeh. You have the shuashim and the min mitzvah kotza, the mitzvah is mashicha, and comes Mishnah Torah, a new pshat, which is different than the shuashim and different than min mitzvahs. In Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, Perik Aleph Halacha Aleph, mitzvah say la'aseis shemen המשחה, שיהיה מוכן לדבורים שצריכים משיחה בו. But the mitzvah is the aseh. But he says שיהיה מוכן, which is something like he's saying over here. But he quotes a different pasuk. V'yosisa shenemar, v'yosisa oisai, shemen mishchas kodesh. The mitzvah is a shemen. But this l'chayra is diametrically opposed to the Rambam in the Shoshim. The Rambam Shoshim says that the Aseh is only akdama. Kachalacha is akdama. The mitzvah is the Mashiach. And in Mishnah Torah says, nah, the mitzvah is the Aseh. I think it's amazingly interesting. I don't know. Again, the same thing in Mishnah Torah where he says Muchan l'mshoyach. The question is the Mashiach part of the mitzvah? You would say no, me'echetese. So they are going to do the same thing and say it's part. That doesn't help us with the kasha, the steer it to the shoshim, because in the shoshim the mitzvah is only the Mashiach. There, the contrast over here is very important. Next. So, there are Gdoli Israel that actually learned in Mishnah Torah that the mitzvah is the making it and the Mashiach. The difficulty that you'll have with that approach is the Protei mitzvahs. The Rambam in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash in Protei mitzvahs, he says, La'aseis shemen hamischa. Period. And l'chayre is, it means the mitzvah is the asiyah, and the Mashiach is not part of the mitzvah. Okay, case. you can do if you go and you take the approach that muchon means that the Mashiach is part of the mitzvah, so then you can imagine that in every place, the Rambam's opinion, the mitzvah is Mashiach. The question is Mashiach to exclude other things or not? That's another way of doing it, and putting the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos together with the Rambam Mishnah Torah, that the mitzvah is not only that it should exist, or you should make it, but you should do Mashiach also. The Muchan, the question what the Muchan is. Next. The problem with all this, but it's not a problem only with these Achronim, the problem with the Rambam in Shiur Asiri and in Minyan Mitzvah Kotza, there's no tzivui on Mashiach. So how can the Rambam say the mitzvah is Mashiach? So you could have said that, as we said, like in certain places, that it's clear that the Torah wants this to happen. You don't need tzivui, and implicit tzivui is also enough. And since it says Hashem and Asher Yutzak Alav, he says that Kohen Agadol Me'achiv Asher Yutzak Alav Shem and Mishcham, is that itself is an implicit tzivui. That's possible. But the oddity is the Ram doesn't quote it. You have another thing like that. You have in mitzvah lamed beis, you have a mitzvah mishtama. Ato ubonecha itcha lifnei oil moed. You and your sons ato ubonecha itcha, you and your sons should be with you. Lifnei oil moed doesn't say what they do. And the Ram quotes this pasuk as a mitzvah of Shmiras HaMikdash. So I mean, since you be there, what are you doing there? So it's implicit that they are watching or something like that, or they're holding the fort, whatever it means. Look at the Rambam Minyan Mitzvahs, the Mitzvah Chav Beis. He tzivonu shenishmo hamikdash v'chulei v'amra yis'aleh li'arein ato uvonecho itcha lifnei oil moed lifnei oil edus. So it means that you and Aaron should be there always. But there's no shmira, mitzvah shmira in the pasuk, but it's the implicit idea of the pasuk. Chais. Now, the Ram here also says that Mashiach of a melech is also in B'chal the mitzvah. So, the problem is you don't have a mishtama over here. And the whole idea of mishtama is also very shvach, because the Ram quotes the pasuk. Yeah, he doesn't quote this pasuk. The Rambam Perek Aleph, Halacha Zayin, in Hilchos Malachim, Kishemamidim HaMelech, Moishchin Oisei B'Shemen HaMishcha. Shenemar, there he has a pasuk. Doesn't have a pasuk here, but he has a pasuk there. Vayikach Shmuel es pach Hashemen, vayitzok al roshai, vayishokehu. And the Rambam takes as a double portion that the Mashiach of Melech Shaul was the Shemen HaMishcha. The question is, the Rambam is telling you the source that Shamidim Melech Moishchin Oisei B'Shemen HaMishcha Shenema Vayikach Shmuel as Pach Hashemen. I thought that the mitzvah to Mashiachas Melech is this pasuk, right? So how could that be? We don't have in Shiur Sheni that we only count mitzvahs mishmu fureshes in Torah shebeksav. Or through a Pirush Makul. And Torah shebeksav means the Torah itself, the Chamisha Chumash. And Mashiachas Melech is learned from a Maisa that Shmuel did in Tanakh, in Navi. For the Navi was what's going on over here. It's an amazing thing. The Sheira. Mitzvahs Shemen HaMishcha is certainly learned from Psukim and Torah itself. And Mashiachas Malachim is only learned from Navi. And maybe you see, the question is, let's say it differently. Question is, how did Shmuel know this? Okay, how did Shmuel know this? Okay, so one could say, no. See, you see, what you can't say is that there was nevuah, because if he says nevuah, and I'm doing it because of nevuah, he's a novi sheker, he's chayiv chenek, because he's machish Torah. Ain't novi sheker chayiv nova. And the fact that Chazal put it in Tanakh and they canonized it means that he wasn't. Okay? So the question is, what's happening over here? So there's an option that maybe Shmuel learned it from some drasha, which we don't know. We know that he did it, and the Biskarov learns in Hilchos Malchos Asuris that you could expand a mitzvah once you have a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah of Shemen HaMishcha, and we know Mashiachas Kohen Gadol. So Mashiachas Melech could extend it with some type of drasha, as the Rambam. What?
From the pasuk in Emor. What's
The pasuk, we know there's
which would be
Mashiachas.
the pasuk? Yeah.
Again, what? We know there's Mashiachas Kohen, right? We know there's Mashiach. Okay. Well, there's Mashiach. So the this mitzvah of Mashiach, we can extend that it's not only in the same way Briskov says, for example, he talks about Oining. That Oining is not only in the Tosh, it's Oining not only in Ma'aser Sheni, but also in Kal V'Chema. It's in Kochim also. That once you have a mitzvah, you can expand on it, okay? So here also you can say expanding on the mitzvah with a drasha, whatever it is. It could be, it could extend not only in Kohen Gadol, but also Melech. That's one way of doing it. It's just very odd. It's so the same way, the vault is the same way that if you had a drush, you can learn it. You're learning for Divrei Kabbalah also. Could have done it. So I just what's coming out over here. Let me just say it, say this a little clear, okay? There's a Gemara in Tainus on Yud Zayin and Beis that basically says part of Yecheskel, Divrei Yecheskel Hanovi, is Yecheskel Buzi, Moshe Rabbeinu lo Yecheskel Buzi minayin, el kak kibul ish mipish, halachim misinai. That whatever it has over there, okay? So why don't we say the same thing? That Shmuel over here is not acting as a Novi, but he's acting as Chacham Echom Chachmei HaMeseira. And there was a Kabbalah the same way that we say Kach Kibu Shmuel Amosi Ish Mipi Ish Halachim Sinai Amoini Amoinis, and that's how that's the Machshir David HaMelech. Or that's how Boaz married Ruth as opposed to Ploni Amoni. So maybe Alocha Moshe Sinai, even though it can never be a mitzvah by itself, because mitzvahs have to be Teresh B'Ksav, maybe you could expand a mitzvah, which is extant, through a Kabbalah of Alocha Moshe Sinai. Similarly, that you can expand it through a drashas chazal, the matik that they learned in Yud Gimel Midas. Not this is Yud Gimel Midas, but there was a Kabbalah. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, that Shmuel is based on a Pirush Makubal, on the pasuk of Shemin Mishchas Kodesh, Yezeli L'Dor Seichem. Okay, that sounds very odd. Okay, how can you have Pirush Makubal? Well, you know what's the hint over here? Okay, so this is based on Ramban Chumash. Comes the Ramban in Shmos Perek Lamed Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Ve'eme ani Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezeh Li L'Dor Seichem Vo'yiroi Sheyoime Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezeh Li Al Levona L'Dor Seichem. Or I'm skipping. Oh Sheyoime V'es Al V'es Bonav Timshach v'kidashto isam l'chayin li v'hoysa lehem chukas olam l'dorisechem ki shov sheloi hiskir rak heim atzmo, the Ramban says, v'chulei, avo kach hadovo tivo sheyimshach boy l'chein ato al ruvonov v'oma shemen mishchas kodesh yezeli limshoyach. Where's yezeh li? Who's li? What's li? Li. Sagt der Ramban pshaten li is limshoyach bo Mashiach Kodshi, my anointed, my holy one, Mashiach Kodshi, my anointed holy one. Asher efcha boy l'derisechem. So steht der Ramban. V'lo yinosein al zah she'einenu li, and that's al zah. The person who's not a zar is li. It's my Ramban. ולכן ימשך בוי המלוכים והכהנים גדולים, כי שניהם משיחי השם, וכוסוף in Tehillim Peites, Chafalef, Motzossi David Abdi, B'Shemen Kodshi Meshachtiv. And he's learning that's the Pshat and Li. B'Shemen Shehu Mishchas Kodesh Li. And I see, I just want to say, so very nice. You say, oh, that's the Ramban, but you know, you always say you can't bring the Ramban to say Pshat and Ramban, you know, maybe. So now let me finish it, okay? Last step, the Rambam Pirush Mishnayis and Krisus, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, Harize Nimshach B'Shemen HaMishcha. V'yedu ha'hamoin shezehu Mashiach Hashem. That is the reason why yedu ha'ham shezehu Mashiach Hashem. So the idea of Mashiach Hashem is the Ram Pirush Mishnayis, also like the Ramban. So maybe you can say it's Li. I just want to tell you that the Ibn Ezra says that Mashiach Malachim is a Horasha. It's not part of the mitzvah. So that's a whole different story. Now, there's Agav, just a point on what we mentioned before, that, okay, we'll get to it later. I guess I just want to say it. We're not going to get to it later anyway. We'll see later. I'll pick this up next week. I'm not sure if I'll get there. The Radak says that the Mashiach of Shaul was Shemen HaFasman. Okay. As they state in Radak, okay. But the Rambam says, nay, no. Okay, so, okay. So, that's the Radak in Radak there.
Wow.
And because the Radak says, since, and there's taka problem, Because the Ram says, Shemoishchin in Halacha Zayin, Rak Malchei Beis Yisrael, Beis David. So how can you do a Mashiach on Shaul? You know, it's against Ram himself is a problem. And Shaul is not a Malchus Beis David. So it could be the Ram holds that you need Malchei Beis David is only after Bechiras David v'Zal Malchus. But before that, everyone's kosher to Malchus. L'chein Mashiach Shaul l'Melech was Mashiach Shemen HaMishcha, called Mashiach David. And this I heard from Mori Rabbi in the Shiur increases. As he explains the Rambam over there, okay? But the Radak in Shmuel, Aleph, Pasuk. In Shmuel Aleph, Perek Yud, Pasuk Aleph, the Mashiach Shaul was Shemen HaFarsimon. And why? Because Mashiach's Shemen HaMishcha is only Malchus Beis David. And he disagrees the Rambam. And it was Mashiach Rak Malchus Beis David. So you see, according to him, you can't learn the mitzvah Mashiach's Melech from Shaul. Just want to tell you something else. That if you accept the Ram, accept all this, it could have been that Ksas Malachim was only Nischadish afterwards when it says who born the B'Kerech Yisrael. But it could be not only there was Mashiach on Shaul, but there would have been Mashiach on Yonasan, because until there was a Bechira for Zechia, B'Yerusha, who born the Yisrael, it was Pasha that did for Shemen HaMishcha. It was only that it was like Kohen Gadol. Only after who above the case became different. That's what I want to suggest. That I thought was interesting. Now, okay. So let's stop here. I still have to go back to the other point. Just thought I'd do this. Okay? Batzlach will pick up Mit Shem Blina the next week.